You are an angel. What does that mean? I don't see any wings. What are you? Yeah.
Definitely not, and no Halo either. No, what an angel investor does, what I do is
Thank you everyone again for coming back to Inklings Behind the Scenes. This is JS Bray with Mr. Bray Labs, and I have my buddy and angel investor and all-around guru, Francis, on here today. Hey, buddy, how you doing, Francis? Go ahead.
doing great, doing great. Do you want to tell the super washer machine story again now that we're
Okay.
officially started? This is great, guys. You're gonna love this.
Okay. So we were talking about inventions, and I mentioned my grandfather. He was an inventor. He actually sold some calculators to Texas Instruments. So the calculator that you know now, whatever is great from Texas Instruments, my grandfather actually had a hand in some of the foundational ones. But he invented a sonic washing machine. And this sonic washing machine could wash your clothes without any water. It would just use frequencies. But the downside is that it would obliterate your buttons, like poof. And the the wild thing is the way he learned this. This is the cool thing. He was in the Navy during the Korean War, and so like he said they would ping sonar back and forth between boats, and that sonar ping would knock all the barnacles off. But that's
Wow. I wonder, do they clean ships like that today?
I don't know. I don't know because I never
Seems like it
served in the
would be a good
Navy.
idea, you know.
Yeah, I mean it. So I thought, well, sonar, just they were pinging it back and forth. So, anyways, that was just a random tangent. But Francis, tell me how's your day going? How are you doing?
Doing very well. We have about 80 degrees and sunny here in northern New Jersey.
Nice.
And we've escaped all that horrible heat we had in August, so things are good.
Well, that's good. That's good. Are you? I mean, like, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm now in Nashville, and it's warm all the time. So that means I keep my house like frozen. Like, are you a 72 is like golden? Like, what is your temperature? Like, what do you feel like the most comfortable about? Just curious.
Probably like 60s, like probably I grew up in Wisconsin, so I guess my
Oh,
Southland might
okay.
be just like air cooler. Not too cold, honestly. I've had enough cold and snow for the rest of my life, but probably like in terms of outdoor temperatures, anywhere between about 55 and 75, I like.
Yeah.
When you get much more than that, well, today the humidity's low, but when you get much more than that, it becomes, and it was like 90 every day, and you
Oh,
know we're
yeah.
out of cover this July, and I eventually I was walking down the street, and thank God there was nobody near me. I just yelled out, I can't take this anymore. And I look around and I'm like, please, I hope there's no one near here because I look like a nut. Fortunately, there wasn't. That was when I
Oh,
truly
goodness.
lost it after like 5 weeks of boiling alive.
It's just like a lobster cooking in your shell. So.
I'll tell you, and getting red as well.
Oh goodness. I'm there with you when it's too hot. The funny thing is, and this is just about slice of life flavor stuff. So I'm about 175 pounds. I'm 6'2", but when I lived in Portland, about 2013, I got diagnosed with diabetes and I was over 300 pounds. I was a big guy. I was like a chubby guy, chubby ginger bearded guy. And I would be outside in the dead of winter with shorts and a t-shirt sweating.
Yeah, when a person, because I used to be a lot heavier too, when you're bigger, like that is the one advantage in a sense, is it like
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
kind of impervious to the cold.
yeah.
But
And
in the
built for it.
summer, that's when you truly suffer. You know?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's just, anyways, the weather, I could talk, I don't know. I always find the weather fascinating. So Francis, so tell me a little bit about like what you do. Like, I'm going to say this is a term that not everyone in the animation community understands. You are an angel. What does that mean? I don't see any wings. What are you? Yeah.
Definitely not, and no Halo either. No, what an angel investor does, what I do, is I invest in early stage tech startups. They're typically maybe a year old. In my case, they will generally have maybe a couple 100,000 a year in revenue. They've got a small team, couple people, a few early customers, and I'll give them a little bit of cash along with many other investors. and try to help them grow, try to help them become another Uber, another Google, help them with introductions, things like that.
That's cool. That's cool. Now, because of like the realm of software and technology, I mean, I've played with that stuff for a long time. I mean, being an animator, animation and software like technology has always been at the razor's edge. I mean, it's always been at the razor's edge of what's happening. Um, I kind of feel, and maybe you can tell me if you think otherwise. I feel like everything is becoming a tech startup. Like every new innovation is really at its core. Like Netflix is not really, it's an infrastructure. It's a tech startup. You know, it really is a SaaS. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
and so if they didn't have the infrastructure, because nobody mails stuff anymore, right? Like Netflix wouldn't exist.
Well,
Well, that's cool. That's cool. How do you get, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of like academic ways that you dive into data, but how do you make a decision? Do you ever make one like on a guttural decision? You're like, oh, I just like these people, you know, or is it always sort of the numbers for you?
it's definitely part of it. It's for me, it's both. I can't be blinded by numbers, but I have to know the numbers. And it is an important part of part of my decision. But also just a gut level. What do I think of this founder? What are the odds of this person's success in this startup and in their life in general? I have to think about that.
Yeah.
So you could take a really fantastic founder that I invested in about 2 years ago, Sebastian at Rilla. When I met that company, they were at about half a million a year in revenue. They're now like over 17 million a year. They've grown, one of the fastest growing companies probably of all time.
That's awesome.
You sit down with, thanks. You sit down with Sebastian, and the way that I would describe him is like caffeine personified. He talks at an incredible speed, almost like you've sped up a podcast. And a number of ideas and interesting insights per minute is higher than probably anybody I've ever met. And I asked him, how do you seem to have so much energy? And he said, like, I asked him, like, is it something you're eating, or do you take like a special supplement? Can I take this thing? And he said, like, no, it's not that. I think I was just born that way. I've always been like this. So not that every successful founder is going to look like that, but you can kind of pattern match a little bit and say, if you meet somebody else who's just like burning incandescent with energy and intelligence like he is, you might say, might be worth placing a little bet.
That's awesome. Oh, yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think, well, I can relate to that kind of that mind that's always cooking. I actually have one of the most difficult things of just unwinding for the day. So if I didn't do like my Angelus prayers and my meditations throughout the day, I would just be just a nervous, regardless of caffeine. And I do think that something, they call it neurodivergent, but I think that my grandfather was the same way. His mind was always buzzing, always buzzing. You know, he sat me down when I was 6 and I learned how to make a radio. And it was like, it was just a thing to do. So because of that, though, I do think that that sometimes, like you mentioned, those are some of the innovators because their mind is so busy all the time. Because I believe, and you can correct me if you disagree with it, I believe that innovation is sometimes throwing as much spaghetti at the wall as possible. So if your
Oh
mind's
yeah.
cooking all the time, you're eliminating a lot of bad ideas, right? So
Oh yeah.
I think
Oh yeah.
that's, yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
God only knows how many ideas Sebastian had to go through. I think they were working on that company for a good 3 years or so before they actually made any money. Because I don't know all the iterations it went through, but it was a difficult problem to do what they're trying to do. What they do is provide a coach for outside sales teams with a particular focus on home services. Let's say you want to get your kitchen redone. It's really expensive. From what I've seen, typically 80 to 100 grand, sometimes more. So they will send like a home contractor will send a person to your house and sit down with you and, go through different options and figure out how you want your kitchen to look, thus and so. So they can put their phone there on the table and say, Jesse, if it's okay with you, I'm going to record this call to help serve you better, no different from if you call the call center. Assuming you say yes, they'll turn on Rilla and it'll say at the end, okay, Francis, you missed these two parts of the sales script that are really important. And Jesse had an objection that we haven't heard before, so we should add it to the sales script. So that's pretty much what they do. But the thing is, you're dealing with a dog. We have a nice quiet situation now, but the real world isn't always like that. There's the customer's dog is barking and you can't really tell them, like, can you make the dog stop barking? It's messing up my sauce. I mean, it's their house. Right. What can you say,
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Then their kid runs by screaming. And then, the neighbor has a leaf blower. There's all this dirty audio, not like when you call a call center. It's a much easier problem, something like Gong or whatever. This real world AI, it's voice analysis is far more difficult. And Rilla is the only company that has really mastered this problem.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. I mean, like I mentioned before we started, like I'm working on my dissertation, so my doctoral dissertation. And one of the things that you do when you're doing, like just for those listening, there's a difference between doing like field research and then lab studies. And I think in this sense, the call center is the lab, right? And the field is taking that to the client's home. And you need to have both kind of instances, kind of see how people engage. I did a contract once for this company that was trying to find social emotional learning objectives for a video game for their kids. So I had kids on there and they're playing the game and I'm watching them play the game. And I'll tell you, these kids were having trouble with the game, but all their responses were, no, it's good. I'm enjoying it and like that. But when they're off screen, they're like, oh, this thing stinks. And so you kind of need to be able to balance both, but that's fascinating. AI reading in-field audio. That's cool. Do they have an open API or they're all just, specifically focused on sales?
I think it's just only on it. It's only really used for home services right now.
Okay.
And, you have to use their software. In the future, who knows? One thing I could see this being used for, another form of outside sales, is car sales. In fact, like I mentioned that to them. Another in-person sale of a very high ticket item. But that fella is so dedicated that he was trying to get data to train the AI models on. And he took his phone with him and recorded dates that he went on with girls, just so he could get more audio. And that can go one of two ways. Either it massively turns the woman off and she's like, get me out of here, like barely finishes her salad and leaves before entrees. Or she is a nerd with him about it, and they bond over that. So I guess you go toward those latter people.
That's true. I mean, it all depends. I think if you found a spouse or found a person that you're on a date with and they enjoy the fact that you're technically not turning off from work, that would totally be great. Like, for example, my wife, I love her to pieces. She's very intuitive. She's, true Southern Belle. And she would make our home is like Martha Stewart would be envious of how well she keeps this place in order. Like it's type A, but laminated. But work has to have clear hours for her. Like when I go behind the office door, it's done. Work is done. Because it gets her like, oh, you're going back to work. But I think the idea that you can take that, I mean, that's a lot of dedication. It also shows like his personal life. He may not be ready it sounds like his mistress is his company. Let's just say that.
Pretty much. That's his girlfriend, his wife, his mistress, his best buddy, like all rolled into one. But I can relate to that to some degree though, because like even when I shut down the laptop for the day and I'm making dinner, I'm listening to a podcast with an interview with a company that I'm thinking of investing in, for example. Like it kind of never stops for me either.
Yeah, I get that. And your mind's cooking all the time. And there's a stimulation to it. It's fun. It's exciting. And if you don't have someone else kind of telling you not to do that, what I've discovered, this is like being a father. I have a 9-year-old and I have a 4-month-old, and they're like my little market research. Like they're totally my little market research. Like they don't even realize it. Like I'm like, why do you like this, son? Like what do you like about this, son? And like and you can kind of see that, or I can see like I watch my 4-year-old what his eyes are tracking the red colors. I'm like, that's interesting. I'm gonna look into that. Maybe this project needs to be more geared towards this color palette to draw engagement. And so that's I guess if you are a business owner and you have children, you use them. You may not be able to play with your wife in the business aspect, but you use what you got. That's great.
Yeah, especially if your business has like an element of children to it, like animation might. Of course, some animations for adults, but you know.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's like, I don't know, I guess that's some part of play, like fun is a 4-letter word. It's play. It's the way people really do learn and engage with things. If it's not fun, we stop using it. We stop doing it.
Yeah.
It across the board. Doesn't matter if it's from animals to most, intelligent folks. If you can't have fun doing it, that's great. Okay, so I mentioned how did you get into being an angel investor? Like, if you care to share, like, how did you say
Yeah.
that's what I want to do?
Well, I worked in software for a lot of years, medical software. By 2019, I'd made a little bit of money. Um, Working for other people, I never really cared for. It was really just a check. So once I had what I felt like I needed, I was out. Um, Not a day later, I'll tell you.
That's awesome.
As much as I was very grateful to have the job, like when I no longer felt like I needed it, that was that. So the question is, okay, I'm not doing this thing I'd rather not do. Well, what am I going to do instead? At least for me, sitting around is like not viable. Like even on vacation, I have to work some, or like you were talking about earlier, stimulation. If I
Yeah.
have like a complete lack of stimulation, it drives me nuts. I get bored and antsy. So, I didn't really know what to do with myself. And I read a book at the end of 2020 by Jason Calacanis called Angel. If anybody has an interest in investing in technology startups, the best thing you can do for yourself is to go read that book and do it ASAP. It's interesting, it's not too long, and it's very actionable. It's about as actionable as any book I've ever seen. It's really more of a manual than a typical book. And so you
Cool.
read that book from cover to cover. It won't take you more than a couple of days. It's very engaging, and you'll know at that point, you will know how to invest in tech startups literally just from having read that book. And then you'll
That's awesome.
gain information over time as you continue to work, but you'll have what you need at that point. So then, for about the last right around 3.5 years now, I've been investing in tech startups. I think I have 32 now, I think. I'm starting to lose track, and I can't name them all off the top of my head anymore. And that's when it's the numbers getting a little bit bigger. I used to be able to name all of them like one right after the other, but that's become
Yeah, yeah.
increasingly difficult.
Well, that's cool. I mean, that like, when you start investing and with all things, everyone, creatives invest. They don't always invest wisely in their time, but they definitely invest. They spend their time going, I want to work on this project because it brings X, Y, or Z. And eventually you lose track of it. You kind of lose track of your darlings and where you're at. And I think that's great. Now, do you have like an end game? Like, where do you want to go? Do you eventually want to say, I'm going to invest and I'm actually going to wear a role? Like I want to captain this ship. Is that something you think you might ever want to do?
Um, well, I plan on making 100 investments over 10 years, give or take. I'm about
Oh,
30% of the way through that. A little over 30%, roughly a third. After that was my commitment to myself. 100 investments, 10 years. That's about what it will take to see, am I actually any good at this or not? The
okay.
feedback loop on investing in startups is longer than practically anything short of maybe scientific research or whatnot. And I'm not smart enough to do that. So I better stick to this. But after that, I might possibly raise a venture fund and do this on a larger scale. But
That's cool.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to avoid the complications of managing other people's money, which is really difficult and very time consuming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another part of me says, to heck with it, let's do it bigger, and let's go ahead
Yeah.
and raise that money in the future. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure where it'll wind up, but I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to be for the next 6.5 years.
That's awesome. Well, Francis, I just want to ask you one last question. As you know, you've given so much of your time, and I want to be respectful of
It's no
that.
trouble.
Last question I want to ask you is, do you have like like there in Everest, a Holy Grail, the ultimate thing that you would like to accomplish? Like, what if you could dream out loud? What's your biggest dream?
I want to see a billboard for a company like Uber, for example,
Okay.
that's ubiquitous, used by everyone. And I want to say I knew that company when it was three people, and I saw
Mm,
back then what it could be. And I didn't just see it, I acted on it and got to be a part of building something really big and made a bunch of money on it too.
that's cool. That's very cool. I do think that a lot of it has to do with timing, but you're right. You want to be able to see that.
Yeah.
In 2004, I don't share this with much people. I think you're probably one of the few people I'll ever share this with, but 2004, now I guess with everyone, in 2004, I worked with a startup and we were convinced that we were going to take on YouTube, which was
Mhm.
hilarious. Like we're just a bunch of dumb kids. And we had a bunch of copyright free stuff that we put up there, and we like manually wrote like our what the film was about. And we actually had an algorithm that could stream, which makes no sense, stream HD over a Motorola Razor. And I was like,
Oh, I remember Motorola Razors.
yeah, and we were working on a prototype for what we thought would be a combination calculator, MP3 player, and a phone. And we called it the Alpha Omega device because we were a bunch of Star Trek nerds. But like, ultimately timing has a big deal with it because I thought YouTube 20 years ago, I thought YouTube was going to be so hamstringed by that copyright issue that they were never going to get out of it. But you never know. You never know what people can kind of like overcome. But that's very cool. So you want to be a part of the next Uber, the next Google, the next thing. That's awesome. That's very cool. I love that.
Ideally, yes. And hey, even though maybe you didn't dislodge YouTube, aren't you glad that you at least tried? And you're
Oh
not sitting
yeah.
here years later saying, that could have been me if only I'd have
Oh,
done
yeah.
it. Like, at least now, like, what would have happened if you tried? Well, at least now you know. And darn it, maybe it didn't make it, but you know what? Like, YouTube, a lot of people, a lot of very smart people thought that company was dead. As a
Oh yeah.
matter of fact, like some of the smartest people I've ever met, have said like, if that company didn't get bought by Google, they would have been killed by lawsuits.
Oh
That acquisition basically saved them from bankruptcy. Because Google, they have enough money to fight, and the
yeah.
startup doesn't.
That's so true. That's so true. And I just think that's, of all things, like I'm not a kind of person, I don't get too precious about an idea if you work on it. I think after a while, when you're old enough, you know that if, the whole, I guess the moral of the story of the goose that lays the golden eggs is that the guy got greedy, he killed the goose, and then no more golden eggs. So don't get greedy. Continue to let the ideas flow. But Francis, thank you so much. Before you go, do you got any like piece of tips, advice, stuff that you want to just share, just a few gems, and then maybe plug your blog as well?
Oh yeah, the blog is tremendous.blog. In terms of advice, I don't really have a lot for people, but I don't know what's going to work for everyone else, but I can tell you what works for me, and maybe you guys are similar. I'm certainly 100 times more engaged and working harder now that I work for myself on something I'm actually interested in.
Yeah,
So if there's any way that you out there listening to this can find a way to keep your bills paid while you're able to work on whatever it is that actually interests you, I think that's how you're going to find the greatest success that you will ever find in your life. And also you'll have a good time doing it.
that's sage advice. That's good advice. I do think that's something where a lot of financial literacy is something that creatives don't always have. Figuring out when is time to say goodbye to, to the golden handcuffs. But That's true. A lot of creatives don't really know what they're doing until like, they have the opportunity. But thank you so much, Francis. I really appreciate it. Thank you
Hey,
everyone
thank
for
you.
listening. I will leave a link to Francis's blog and the post, and you all have a blessed day.